You know React very well. You have built components, hooks, or even the full app. You are an expert in React now, but you are still not ready for interviews. Why? You don't know how to test the React components. Unit testing is the most underrated but most frequently asked skill in mid to senior level React interviews. Today I'll teach you how to test your React apps like a pro by using React Testing Library, the tool which is used by big tech companies and the real developers. We'll start from absolute beginner level, cover all the fundamentals, and then move to advanced concepts with real world examples. And if you watch till end, I will provide you beautifully designed PDF cheat sheet with all the syntax, tips and best practices that you can refer anytime for your revision. So let's get started. Alright, before we jump into writing tests, let's understand the tools that we are using. First is Vitest. So what is Vitest? So think of Vitest as a modern replacement for Jest. So you must have seen that in old projects we used Jest as a test runner. So now Vitest is the tool by the Vite and it fits very well with the Vite ecosystem and Vite bundlers. It's super fast, it works perfectly with Vite and gives you all the test runner features like describe, eat, expect, mocking and coverage and so on. So if you are using Vite and React, Vitest is the best option. The next tool we will need is React testing library itself, and that's what you are looking for, correct? So this is the React testing library. This library helps you test your React components the way real users use them. Okay, so how real users use the websites or web apps. So users go to the website, they load the page, they click on some buttons, they navigate to some links and they verify that this page is opened or not. So the same way React testing library is gonna work, and that's the beauty of React testing library. So it more focuses on the user behavior and it tests the components in the same way the user can interact with the components. Instead of testing internal state or class names, it tests what user sees on the browser, right? What is the difference between Vitest and React testing library? If we are using Vitest, why are we using React testing library? So these questions can obviously come in mind. So there is a clear and simple difference between these two, that Vitest is a test runner. So while testing UI application, we need two components: a tool which will give the tooling for testing, like where we can write the test and it should run the test. Okay, so for that Vitest is there. So it just finds the test files in your project and runs them, and it provides that kind of tooling to run the test. Okay, so that is the work of Vitest. But React testing library is more focused about React components. Okay, so what actions do we need to do with the React components? We need to find the elements. Okay, we need to wait, we need to click on something, we need to type in the input box. So this kind of tooling is provided by React testing library. Vite is a test runner and React testing library provides the tools to interact with your React components. So this is the difference, and this can be asked in interviews as well. How Vite and React testing library test the code under the hood? Let's understand that. So just like you open the web app on the browser, okay, for that we have React testing library and JS DOM. JS DOM creates a virtual browser environment and creates a virtual DOM, and React testing library interacts with that virtual DOM. So suppose you write a test, okay, and you run that test using Vitest. So what Vitest does is, the first thing it does is it finds the test file. Okay, it finds the test file, it starts running the code. When the component renders in the virtual DOM, we can interact with that virtual DOM using screen API provided by the React testing library, and then we can click on it and we can type the text, and all the things that we can do on the browser we can do it here. And we can put some assertions that when I click on this button, this thing should happen on the web page. That behavior we can test whenever we are adding some new code. By this we can test that it is not breaking the existing functionality. So that is the main motto behind the unit and integration testing. This was all about the basics of React testing library and Vitest and how it tests the components. So are you excited? Let's get started by creating a simple React component, and that we will test by using React testing library. For creating the React project, I am using Vite. So you can check the link in the description. Vite is the most popular build tool nowadays for React and any other JavaScript application. So for creating one application using Vite, what we can use it, we can use the command npm create Vite at latest. So it will ask for some options. So let's try that. So it will take some time. Let's give the project name testing demo. Okay, testing demo. Let's use the React. In React, I'm using TypeScript plus SWC compiler. Yeah, and the Vite has created the project. It's very fast actually. So let's go to the testing demo and let's open the code editor. For opening the code editor on Windows, you can type code space dot so that it will open the same project in the VS Code. Code is the shortcut for VS Code, and let's open it. So let me zoom in a bit. Okay, so the project is already opened, so we can run that project, but this is not a React tutorial. This is a React testing library tutorial. So let's go ahead and install all the packages that are required for the React testing library. So let me clear the terminal. And what packages do we need for this? So as I said, we need Vitest, we need React testing library, and also we'll need JS DOM because we need to create the virtual DOM using the JS DOM. So let's install the Vitest first. So the command is npm install, and this will be dev dependency. So let's call it save dev Vitest. Okay, so this will install the Vitest in our project folder. So let's wait for it to install. Okay, so this is installed. For running the tests in Vitest, we have a command called Vitest. We will configure that command first in our project. So let's go to VS Code again, and here in the package JSON, go to scripts. Here we will add one test script. Okay, so that test script will be test. We can name it whatever we want. So let's call it Vitest. Vitest will run the tests in our application. So this we need to configure. Okay, so the next package we need to install for our test setup is Jest DOM. So let's install that as well. npm install. You can use capital D also instead of save dev. It does the same thing for saving the dev dependency. So npm install -d JS DOM. Let's install the JS DOM. Okay, so the JS DOM is installed in our project. So let's adjust our vite config JS to support our JS DOM environment. So let's go to our project again, go to vite.config.js. So this is a TypeScript project. So here all the files are with extension TS. So if you are using the JS, you'll find it with the JS extension. So here you can provide the environment, and it will be JS DOM. Okay, so if you are setting up using TypeScript, so here it says this doesn't exist on the type user config export. So let's add one type here for that user config. Yeah, and let's import it from the Vite. Okay, type user config. So this error is gone after this. So this was the environment setup. Okay, so the next and last part remaining is installing the React testing library. So let's install all the packages that are related to React testing library, and we need all these packages. So let me show you the package names. So we need testing library / Jest DOM to interact with the DOM through the testing library. We'll need testing library / React, as we are using the testing library for React. So this is the main package we have. The next part is testing library / user event. So we need to click on the components. We need to type something, right? For that we need user event. So let's note this package names and let's install it. Great. So we have already installed all the packages that are required for our setup. So let's write one simple test. For that you need to go to app, or anywhere you can go, write app.test.tsx. so here this .test is very much important because Vitest searches for any file name with .test, okay, in the file name. So this is very much important. So let's write our first test case here. So for writing the test, we'll need two components, one from the Vitest as I said, and the second is from the React testing library. So let's import some things from the Vite. So import describe, okay, it and expect from Vitest, okay, and import render and screen from testing library React. So what are the uses of it, we'll see in a while. Okay, let's import the app as well. So Copilot is helping us to write that. So let's write describe, okay, and this describe is kind of a test suite. Okay, so you can write for app component, you will write like 5 to 6 test cases. Okay, but how will you group them? For grouping them, describe is the function given by the test runners. So describe is nothing but the test suite. So let's call it app component test suite. Okay, and this describe takes one callback as an argument. Okay, so let's include that callback, and inside this callback we have to write our tests. Okay, we have to write our tests inside this callback. So for that, for writing a test, we have it block. Okay, so why it is named as it? Because the creators of the test runners expect that you should write a meaningful word or meaningful sentence after it. Here Copilot is giving one suggestion here. It should render, so it becomes a complete sentence, right? It should render the app with correct initial state. So this is the meaning of it. So it is the actual test case, and just like described, it will also take one callback as an argument where we will write our tests. So here you can see it is suggesting me some content, but I'm not going into that complexity. We have the render function provided by the React testing library. Let's import our app component here. Okay, so this will render the app. Okay, so render from the React testing library, which is imported from the React testing library, is used to render the component in the virtual DOM. So this is the use of render function. So here what we will do is we will just print the DOM. So for printing the DOM, we have screen.debug method. Again, the screen is imported from the React testing library, and this debug is nothing like a console log. Okay, but the screen is a page object, okay, of the testing library. So it will just print the DOM in the app component, and here we need to pass undefined and some number. So what is this undefined and number? So undefined, so if you just hover over it, okay, so it expects one element, but we want the complete DOM, so we don't want any specific element here, so we can pass undefined, so it will pick the complete DOM. And this number, if you just hover over it again, so it is about the max length, so it will clip the DOM, or it will clip the debug and to whatever number we are passing. So we want the complete DOM, so that's why I'm putting some big number here. Okay, and so we can just run this test now. So let's get the terminal. So what is our script? npm run test that we have already configured in the package.json. Okay, so let's run that. Okay, and we have our first pass test here. So one test passed. This test is passed because we don't have any assertions. Okay, so let's go here. So here we ran the test, but from here we got the output. So we got the DOM itself. Okay, so we got this virtual DOM printed in our console because of the screen.debug statement, and this you can verify from the app that this is correct. Okay, the count is 0. Here we have passed the count state here in the app component, correct? So the count initial state is 0. So this DOM is the actual DOM after reading the initial state. So and this is up to the body. So this is all about running the tests in React testing library. So congratulations, you have run your first React testing library test. We have already created our first React testing library test. Let's write another test with the props. Let's go to the app tsx and let's delete all the code that is created by Vite, and let's add some our own code here. And I'll add one name prop here that will be optional prop, and let's add some type here. Name is optional and that is string. And let's display here name, and let's call it h1 as it's a heading. So our app component is ready with prop name and displaying our name in the h1 heading. It should display some heading. We will write test for this new app component. Let's head over to the app test tsx. As I said, for writing a test, each time we'll add one it block. We'll add the test name here. It should render the app name prop, and inside that we'll provide one callback, and this again will start with the rendering of app. In the render we'll pass app, we'll pass the custom render prop here, learn testing in React, and we'll close the app. This will basically render our app components. Let's test this. How to test this? We'll grab the element first. We'll create one variable here. Let me minimize the terminal. We'll create the element here. For grabbing or interacting with the DOM, as you know, we need screen object. And we can use methods on that screen object, and that screen can be imported from the React testing library itself. We can say screen, and here for getting any element on the DOM, there are many methods provided by the React testing library. If you just hover over it, you will see getBy role, getBy test ID, getBy text, getBy title, query all by, and find all by. There will be many. Yes, what are these? What is the difference between find, query and get? We'll see later in this tutorial. Just get started by text, because this is a text. Let's call it getBy text, and here we'll pass whatever we have given in the prop. Let's copy it, learn testing by, and let's make our first assertion here. Expect this heading to be defined. This heading should be defined. This is our first assertion. What we are doing, we are rendering the app, we are grabbing that name that is passed as a prop, and we are expecting that it should be present in the document. This name will go here and it will go inside the name prop. Let's run this test. Let me open the terminal again. Whenever I save, it is waiting for file changes. So this is in watch mode. Here you can see for the first test, it is printing that Shubham, because in the first test we haven't provided the name prop, but in the second we have provided it. But in the first we have the screen.debug, that's why it is printing the DOM. But in the second we haven't added that screen.debug, that's why it is not printing the DOM, but it is passed. That means this name is present. We can verify this using the screen.debug again. Screen debug heading. Let's not, I will print the full DOM here. Now each time I don't want every test case to be run, because if I have 7 to 8 test cases and I'm only working on the first test case, it is not good, right? For that we have some tricks that we can use here. We can use it.skip. It will skip this test case and it will only run it, this one. Or instead of the skip, if you have 8 test case and you have to only run 8th test case, what we can use, it.only. It will run only this test case inside this suite. Just remember that. Yeah, our file is saved, and here you can see it is just running the one test case, that is this one, and it is printing the message that is learn testing in React. Cool. We have learned many new things in this session, that how we can create the test case, how we can create the test suite, how we can create multiple test cases here, and how we can grab the elements by using screen methods, how we can debug using screen.debug, and how we can put the assertions in the test case. This is the very basic and very important part of this tutorial, that how we can write the basic test cases. Once we are able to write the basic test cases, it is very easy. We have to just add the elements, we have to just add the interactions, and we have to just add the assertions, and that's it. All the code can be tested by this way. Let's learn about 3 important ways that React testing library offers to pick elements from the DOM. The one we have already seen, that getBy text, we have already used, but there are 2 other ways also. What is the difference between get and other 2 ways, and in which use cases we have to use which way? We'll understand this now. There are 3 ways by which we can pick the elements on the virtual DOM in the testing environment. The first is getBy. Okay, if you see getBy, we have used getBy text here. In getBy we have multiple methods that start with the getBy, just like getBy text, getBy placeholder text, getBy alt text, getBy label text, getBy role. This is very important, that getBy, it starts with getBy. So now the second way is queryBy. What is queryBy and what is the difference between getBy and queryBy? Here you can see it returns null if not found. That is the basic and important difference between getBy and queryBy. Is if some element, suppose there is a button, that button is mandatory to be in the DOM, that button is compulsorily should be in the DOM. In that case we should use getBy, because it throws error if that button is not present. So getBy throws error when the button is not present in the DOM. It should be there ideally, but it is not in the DOM. It should raise the error so that we can fix that bug, because that button is not present in the DOM, that means that's a bug. But sometimes that button can be optional. It should be, I mean, it can be displayed in the DOM, or if that button is not in the DOM, that is also fine. If that button is optional, in that case we can use queryBy, because it will not raise the error, it will not break your test. Suppose you are writing some test with numerous assertions, like there are like multiple assertions here. This is just an example, it never happens this way. And in between you have some getBy text, so in between you have screen dot getBy text or anything, and this is not found by the test runner. In that case the further assertions or the further test case will not be executed, because this test case is failed at this place. But this button or this text was completely optional. We should not fail the complete test case for this optional part, right? In that case we should use queryBy text. So in that case we should use queryBy text. It returns null if element is not found. This was the basic difference between getBy and queryBy. What is the findBy then? What is findBy? So this is way way more powerful than these two because it handles the async operations. How async operations work? Suppose you click on a button, and when you click on a button, you hit any API. In that case, it will take some few seconds, right? It can take few seconds. Though APIs are not hit in the test environment, we never hit the real APIs in the test environment. We need to mock the data for the test environment. Okay, we never hit any internet API, or we never call the backend in the test environment. But it still takes, because whenever there is a promise, it can take synchronous time, right? Suppose we clicked here, okay, we clicked on the button, and here there is a API or any async behavior, and after that async behavior is happened, we have to expect some async thing, like some text will be displayed synchronously, like after 1 second or after few milliseconds it can be displayed. If we directly gonna expect it, or if we directly want to find any new element, after that we'll use getBy role something. After this async, it will not work because this thing is not loaded yet, because this is asynchronous. In that case, we need to use findBy. Whenever we have to pick the elements after one async operation, or whenever we have to pick the elements which are asynchronous, which are coming asynchronous, in that case we need to use findBy role. This findBy role needs to be awaited. As you know, if we have to use await, we'll need to mark this test as sync. This is very basic JavaScript concept that we can use async await, and you can use await findBy role. For find, we need to await it because it returns a promise, and it is used for handling sync operations. This was the difference between all these three: getBy, queryBy, and findBy. For each variant, for getBy, there are multiple methods like getBy text. For queryBy also, it will have the queryBy text, and for findBy also, it will have findBy text. And it is for each and every method, it will have three variants. For example, by text is the one way to pick the element, then it will have queryBy text, it will have getBy text, and it will have findBy text also. We have all the methods present in all the three ways. Also, for by text, suppose there is only one element, then we can use getBy text. But what if there are multiple elements? Suppose there is a button, there is a cart button on the page, the cart that we have on the e-commerce applications. That cart button is also multiple times. In that case, for each variant, we have all by text. Each method becomes all by text. This query all by, find all by. So in summary, for each way of picking element, we have getBy, queryBy, findBy, and for each way we have all by also, like get all by, query all by, find all by. By this way, we can handle or pick any element on the DOM. That was all about picking the elements from the DOM. Let's write some interactivity in our application. Let's rewrite our application. Let's call it app, and we'll add one counter application here. Here I will write another div, and we'll add one count here. For that, we'll delete this state, this prop, we'll not need it, and we'll add one use state here, and let's add the initial counter as 0, and let's add one increment here. Let's add one button, and let's call it increment, and let's call it click, and on click it should increment the count. This is our basic application in which it will display the count, and whenever we click on the button, it will increment the count. Let's add test for it. We have removed this name prop. For that, I'll comment it for now because the TypeScript will give the error for this. Let's add another test case here, and we have to test the interactivity here. We have to click on the button, correct? We have to click on the button. For that, we can use two libraries here. It is the first is not library. It comes with the React testing library. It's called Fire Event. The second one is User Event. What is the difference between Fire Event and User Event? Fire Events handles the interactions just like a machine is doing it. But user event handles the interaction just like the user itself is clicking on the button, or user itself is trying to type into the input box. This is the main difference between user event and fire event. User event more focuses on the user behavior. We should use user event most of the times. Let's write the test case. It should increment the count on the button click. Let's start with the first step. That first step will be rendering of the app, render. Then what we have to do, we have to see that the initial count is 0 or not. We'll write the assertion for that. Count initial count get by text 0. Let's see how we can add some role here. It is very important to get by role most of the times, because roles are specific to the accessibility of the application. If there is a button, the role should be button. Okay, if there is a tab, the role should be tab. If there is an input box, the role should be input. We should pick by input or the role. We should pick by roles. Most of the times we should use the queries like get by role, query by role, or find by role, because that maintains and that ensures that we are testing in the real user way. Suppose if there is a button which has a label of increment and you are picking that element by using text, that doesn't mean that user is able to see only the text. User will be able to see the button, right? That text will be shown as a button. We should test in the user's way. For that we need to test by role. Here I'll change it to some heading. I'll call it h1, that I can pick it by role. Let's go here and instead of using get by text, let's use get by role, and here we can get the role as heading, and the name is nothing but the text that is present. Name will be 0. Let's assert that this should be defined. Expect initial count to be defined. This is the first assertion. The next is button. Copilot is easing our task. So button screen get by role button, and the name, as I said, name is just the text on the element. The name is increment. We get this by name increment, and let's expect that button is defined. Then we'll do button dot click. This doesn't work like this. Here we can use fire event. Let's import it from the testing library and use the click method on it, and let's pass the button in here. Let's use fire event dot click and let's pass button here. Okay, once the button is clicked, we don't need to await it here. Just note this point. Fire event is used to click or interact with the element, but we don't need to use await here. And once the button is clicked, the count will be updated, but it will be done asynchronously, because the state updates are done asynchronously in React. What we will do, we'll get the updated count. So await find by text, but here I will pass or get by role, find by role, and here the role will be again heading, because we are not changing the element, and the name will be 1. Okay, and the find by role needs to be used by screen. Okay, and then we can expect that updated count should be defined. Okay, yeah, this is our basic test for testing this application of count. And let's test this. We render the app, we get the initial count text, we expected that it to be defined, then we got the button, we expected that button is present, then we clicked on the button and we tested that the count is updated to 1. Let's test this. I'm in the terminal, and here I'll pass it dot only, that will run only this test. And let me clear the terminal and let's call npm run test. Right, we have passed the test. It ran the test. App components, it should increment the count on the button click, and it is passed. Suppose let's fail this test case deliberately. Let's call it 2 here. Whenever the initial count is 0 and then we are clicking on it and it becomes 2, but it will become 1 really, right, in real example, but we are deliberately making it fail, that we can test that our test is working fine. Let's save this file, and it is not detecting. Let's test this again, npm run test. Now it is failed. Let's see how it is failed. Here you can see in the DOM it says it is incremented to 1, but we have one assertion that it should be incremented to 2. That's why it is failed. Okay, here you can see it shows the step at which this is failed. Find by role 2. It actually got 1 here. That's how our test is working perfectly fine. This was all about our first test case using fire event. Let's test this using user event. For user event, let's import user event. Instead of fire event, we can use user event here. Let's user event dot click, but this needs to be awaited. First thing is we need to import it. let's import it from the testing library user event. Import user event from testing library user event. This is another package that we have already installed, and here we need to await it, and let's test it again. Test is running again. It is again working fine. It is failing at this thing. We'll correct it again. One, yes, it is passed. Our test is perfectly working fine. Let's learn about how we can test the API calls in the React testing library. So whenever we are building dynamic applications that interact with server frequently, we need to include the API calls in our application, correct? So how we can test it, because that is the integral part of a UI to interact with server. For that, I have created a simple application here. So here we have one button called fetch user. When I click on this button, it will call the JSON placeholder API and will fetch one user and will display its name here. So when I click on it, yes, so here you can see the username is fetched from the network call. So I'll show the code for this component. So it is just one, the name we are showing here, and we have one fetch user button, and it is calling this fetch user function, and it's calling the API using fetch. So let's test this behavior of the application in the React testing library. Let's add another test in our application. It again should be able to fetch user data, correct? And it will be again an async test case, so that's not right. So we'll render the app using the render function. So this will always be the first step, and we'll skip this test case first because we have changed the app code. So we'll render the app, then we'll pick the button, the fetch user button. So this button we have to get it into our code. So getBy role button fetch user. So we have already seen in the last video part. So expect that this button is defined, and we will click on the button, await user event. As I said, user event handles the interactions just like the user clicks on the button. So we used user event dot click, and and we are awaiting it, right? Because this will be a synchronous application, and here we will call the API. So now from the test cases, we never call the real APIs. Just note this point. In the test cases, we never call the real APIs. For that, we need to mock it, correct? Because if we just click it and we will expect something here, we will never able to get that final result of the username. For that, we'll need to mock it. So what we have to mock it? We will need to mock this fetch. So whenever this fetch will be called inside this component, it will run the mock function instead of the real fetch. So understand it again. Whenever this fetch will be called in our component, it will run the mocked fetch instead of the real fetch. That it will be intercepted by the React testing library, and it will not run the real fetch. It will run the mock fetch. So whenever there will be fetch, it will run the mocked fetch. Mock means fake. We are faking that behavior. So let's mock the fetch because we don't want it to be real API call. For mocking the fetch in the Vitest environment, we need to import the v object from Vitest. So we can use that object here, v.spyon. Spyon means it is a function that is used for mocking the inbuilt functions. So global this we can use, and in that we have to mock the fetch, and inside that we can mock the resolved value of fetch, that is what fetch will return. So fetch will return the JSON method. Here you can see fetch is returning one object in which we have the JSON method. So we have to mock that JSON method as well. So fetch, we are mocking the fetch, and we are returning its resolved value because fetch is returning one promise. We are mocking the resolved value of JSON, and in that what JSON does, it returns a function that returns the user object. So this data that is returned from the JSON is nothing but this object that we are mocking here. So this is a bit complex to understand, but you can watch this part of the video again. So how we are mocking the fetch API or the fetch here in the test environment. Okay, so if we are just putting this code inside this test block, for this test case, the fetch will be mocked, and whenever this component will be rendered and whenever fetch will appear in the code, so in that case, this fetch will be run instead of the real fetch. And whenever we click on the button, then we have to await it. As this process is asynchronous, we need to await it. Find by role heading Shubham Kulkarni. So here you can see we have used h1 here, and in that we are rendering the name. We can put heading. So this username we will get it from the fetch response, and expect username to be defined. So this is our synchronous test that we have defined. So let's run this test using it dot only, that only this test will be run. So I'll I'll go to the terminal and here npm run test. This test is passed and we are able to fetch the user from here. So this is how we mock the fetch API and handle the API request in the test environment. In this part of the tutorial, I am going to cover all the remaining important parts that are required for you to understand while working with React testing library. So there are many important points that I'll cover that are very important for making you perfect in the React testing library. The first one is how to test the components in the context or Redux. So suppose you have a component that is part of the Redux. So in that project we are using Redux or we are using context. So in both the context and Redux we use the provider at top level component, correct? In the Redux we use Redux provider to provide the store. In the context API we use context provider to provide some values. In both the cases, if you just try to test the code just at the component level and if your component reads some value from the context or Redux, in that case your tests will fail because it will not get the data from the Redux or context. So how can we fix that? I'll give one example here. So suppose here you are using some value from the context. Use context and that value is used somewhere. So suppose here you are using that value and you are just testing your app here, but you will not get that value because your top level app is not wrapped. So this is just a consider this is just a normal component and this is not app. So this app is not wrapped by the context provider, but the top level, the top level parent is wrapped by the context provider. It is passing this value from the top level to this particular component. But in your test environment, your test doesn't know that this component is wrapped in the context provider. So you will need to solve this problem. You will need to wrap your component in the context provider like this. So suppose your context provider name is this. It can be any name. It doesn't need to be context provider. It can be anything. You have to just import it and you have to wrap it here and you have to pass some value here. So this context provider can be anything like theme provider or whatever. So you will need to pass that in the test case itself so that your app will get these value from the context provider and it will be able to handle all the values from the context. And same it applies to the Redux as well. In the Redux you have to pass the store. So in the Redux you have to get the provider from the React Redux, and in that you have to pass the store. So the store will be Redux store, whatever store you create. So it will be Redux store, create store. So it will be this create store or configure store. You can get it from the Redux, and this you will pass this to this so that your app will get all the values from the Redux store. So this is very important while you are working with Redux or context API. So this I wanted to know you because most of the times we are working in Redux or context API, and if you are testing that kind of stuff, the tests will fail most of the times. So you need to wrap your component in the providers. The next part comes is while working in the router. So suppose you are using use navigation or use history, that's that kind of hooks, that those hook only work when your component is wrapped inside the router. So if your top level component is wrapped inside the router, your component that is inside the test environment needs to be wrapped in the router as well. So you while working with router, you will need to wrap your component in the router as well, like browser router, and then wrap your component inside so that your app will start working with the router environment, and again all the data related to navigation like the path and history will be accessible by your application. So very important, whenever your component or top level component is wrapped inside any kind of provider, you need to wrap your test environment component also in that wrapper. So few more important points about React testing library are Act. What is Act? Act is a utility that is provided by React testing library. It is used for making sure that all the updates that are applied to DOM before making any assumptions. For example, this button click event. Okay, so here is a operation is being done on this button, that we are clicking that button. This button click has a handler which has multiple state updates and multiple DOM updates to be done after this button is clicked. Okay, so if we are expecting something after this button is clicked, so we will need to make sure that all the updates or all the code that is put in the handler of button click should be executed and it is updated on the DOM correctly. For that, we can use act from the React testing library. We can place all the code that is doing all the heavy operations or heavy DOM updates inside the act, and we can later expect whatever we want to be done after this asynchronous operation. This is very useful for testing asynchronous updates and side effects. The another utility that is helpful in the asynchronous operations is waitFor. So suppose there is some assertion that needs to be done whenever some condition becomes true. Okay, so here we are expecting some condition to be true, but we need to wait for it to complete this asynchronous application. For that, we can use waitFor, that is again imported from the React testing library. Okay, waitFor, it is used to wait for some condition to become true. So act and waitFor are very useful for handling asynchronous operations in the testing library. The next and important utility we have is render hook. So it is basically imported from the React testing library. Here you can see it is imported from the React testing library and it is used to test the custom hooks in isolation. Okay, so what does it mean? So suppose you don't want to test the complete component, but you have to test only the hook. Okay, so hooks are basically functions. They are special functions identified by React, correct? So if you want to test the hook, you cannot call a hook outside a component, correct? So as the hooks can't be called outside the React component, we need to have that hook inside this render hook using a callback, and we can get the result from the hook and we can test that hook efficiently. So this is how render hook from the React testing library is able to run the custom hooks and test it efficiently. You have now mastered the React testing library. I have covered each and every concept that you will require to be expert in the React testing library, from beginner to advanced, from writing first unit test to writing complex unit tests of Redux and context. And you are still watching at the end, and as you are still here with me to the end of this video, as promised, I am going to provide a beautifully designed PDF cheat sheet which has all the important concepts listed about React test library, which you can use to revise at any time. You can find the link in the description. It is free. If you like this video, hit like, share with your friends, subscribe to my channel now, and comment down what part of the video you liked the most. So that's it for today. Bye bye.